Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we drift into a world of candlelight, powdered wigs, and the golden heartbeat of a nation shaped by one man's will. You're about to wander through the life of Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, whose reign stretched longer than most lifetimes, across palaces and battlefields, through silken court rituals and cold winter famines. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. Feel free to share your location and time zone in the comments. Our cosy circle of dreamers spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken beneath a high canopy of crimson velvet. The air smells of beeswax and ink, and the wooden floor beneath your slippers creaks softly as you shift your weight. The year is 1643, and all around you, France holds its breath. A new king has just been born, not into the world, but into the weight of the crown. Louis Dieudonné, Louis the God-given, was only 5 years old when his father, King Louis XIV, died after a long illness. His mother, Anne of Austria, takes your hand gently as she guides her young son toward the royal dais. He is quiet, solemn beyond his years, with wide, questioning eyes and a velvet coat too heavy for his small shoulders. No royal trumpet sounds. There is no coronation today. That will come later. But the child is now a king, whether he understands it or not. You feel the hush of the royal court gather like fog. The men in their lace collars bow low, the women curtsy deeply, and somewhere behind them, a scribe begins to scratch the date into parchment. May 14th, 1643. A child has become the King of France, but he will not rule, not yet. In these early years, the real reins of power are held tightly by Cardinal Mazarin, an Italian-born priest and shrewd political navigator. You often see him in the corridors of the Louvre Palace, whispering with ministers, always with the scroll tucked beneath his robe. He smiles easily, but rarely shows his full hand. He is grooming young Louis not just to wear the crown, but to wield it. The court moves with caution. France is wealthy, but fragile. A long war, the 30 Years' War, is still dragging across the continent, draining coffers and patience alike. Peasants whisper of hunger, nobles gossip of opportunity. As you sit beside the young Louis in his study, you notice his fascination with miniature cannons, maps, and golden ink pots. He practices his handwriting under the flickering light of an oil lamp, drawing looped letters on fine paper while Mazarin watches with calculating pride. It is here that a small human moment takes root. One rainy evening, the child king, having grown tired of writing, sneaks a sugared almond from the table and hides it in the cuff of his sleeve. When Mazarin pretends not to notice, you catch the ghost of a smile on the cardinal's face, a rare glimpse of softness in a life otherwise bound by politics. Historians still debate just how close Louis and Mazarin truly were. Some say Louis viewed him as a father figure. Others believe the bond was colder, born of necessity. But in these quiet chambers, you sense something deeper. A boy watching every move, learning how power whispers rather than shouts. France outside the palace is a different world. The common people till their fields and bake their bread with little thought for the boy king behind gilded walls. But storm clouds are gathering. The nobles of France, long suspicious of royal power, are not content to sit idle while a child sits on the throne. Soon, rebellion will rattle these very walls, but not tonight. Tonight, you return to your chamber. The bed is piled high with downy blankets, and the shutters rattle gently with the spring wind. Somewhere below, a stable boy yawns, and a maid extinguishes the last hallway candle. You lie still beside the dreaming boy king as the fate of a nation begins to turn beneath his tiny slippered feet. The morning comes slowly. The pale sunlight slips in through the narrow windows of the Louvre Palace, filtering through dust motes that spin like tiny planets in the air. You awaken beside the young king, now a few years older, his face longer, his eyes heavier with the beginnings of understanding. The crown still rests on a pillow, untouched by his own command, and France remains in the quiet, capable grip of Cardinal Mazarin. You walk the corridors with Mazarin now, always with parchment in hand, always in motion. His voice is low but constant, conferring with diplomats, scribes, and councilmen. You listen as he speaks of alliances, treaties, and court appointments. His accent still bears the soft curvature of Rome, though he's become the very pulse of Parisian politics. Louis watches from the side, often silent, but never idle. He mimics the way Mazarin greets ambassadors, how he reads documents slowly and with one brow slightly raised. You see Louis take notes when he thinks no one is watching, jottings on his cuff, the margin of a book, the back of a discarded pamphlet. In these years, power does not belong to the monarch. It flows, invisibly, through the cardinal. France, for all intents, is a monarchy under clerical stewardship. Anne of Austria still reigns in name beside her son, but even she increasingly defers to Mazarin. The court becomes a chessboard. Noble families send their sons to serve under Mazarin. They smile, bow, and flatter, but beneath their powdered wigs lie grudges. Long ones. Some nobles believe the Italian cardinal has too much influence. Others resent that their own hands are not closer to the reins. You begin to hear whispers, faint at first, but persistent. The Fronde. It begins like a sigh in a locked room. Nobles, magistrates, and even certain Parlement members meet in secret, frustrated by taxes and Mazarin's unshakable control. These gatherings, at first mere complaints, slowly harden into action. You can feel it in the air, a stiffness, a spark. In 1648, while the boy king is just 10, the tension spills out into the streets. Stones are thrown. Barricades rise in Paris. You watch from a palace window as armed citizens march past, shouting slogans against Mazarin. The child king peeks from behind a curtain, his hand gripping yours tightly. His world safe and ordered is breaking into fragments outside. This is the first of the Fronde uprisings, a series of rebellions by nobles, magistrates, and eventually princes of the blood who seek to weaken royal power under the guise of legal reform. You watch as the royal family is forced to flee Paris under the cover of night, sleeping in cold chateaux with the sound of musket fire never far behind. It leaves a mark. In years to come, Louis will remember this moment not as politics, but as humiliation. A monarch made homeless, a king without control. There is one night in particular that lingers in your mind, in a darkened manor house outside the capital. Louis curls up beside his mother and whispers into the night one day, "I will never run again." But rebellion is a fire that burns hot and then flickers out. By 1653 the Fronde has lost steam, the noble alliances fracture, and the public grows tired of unrest. Mazarin returns in triumph, older now, but victorious. He resumes control, though with more care, more patience. You walk with him in the gardens one morning and sense the weariness in his steps. The years of conflict have aged him. And young Louis, he has grown quieter, more deliberate. You see him studying maps of French provinces, listening to court cases, learning not just from Mazarin's success, but from his near downfall. The lesson is clear: never let others rule in your name. Never cede power once it is yours. There is a softer moment, too, on a rainy spring afternoon. You find Louis in the royal library, reading a book of Virgil's poems aloud to a small greyhound curled beside the fire. He reads slowly, with a gravity well beyond his age. When you approach, he looks up, and you see in his gaze a flame not yet ablaze, but burning nonetheless. Historians still wonder how much Louis was shaped by Mazarin during this time. Was he merely a student, or was he already calculating how he would one day eclipse his mentor? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. In 1661, Mazarin's health begins to falter. The corridors quiet. The court waits. Louis, now 22, walks the halls of the Louvre with his head high and his eyes distant. Then one morning Mazarin does not rise from his bed. You're there in the chamber, the curtains drawn, the oil lamp flickering low. Louis stands beside the cardinal's still form, silent. He does not weep. He only places a hand on Mazarin's shoulder, then turns to you and whispers, "It is time. France will soon see a monarch unlike any it has known before." But for now, the palace is still. A chapter closes, and a sun waits to rise. The bells of Paris toll softly in the early morning fog. You awaken with the scent of wet stone in the air, the kind that rises after a long night of rain. The city feels hushed, like it, too, is waiting for something. In the quiet halls of the palace, Louis walks with a measured grace, no longer the boy who hid behind his mother's skirts, but not yet the monarch who will eclipse every throne in Europe. You walk beside him as he gathers his ministers in the salon. He wears black today, not in mourning, but in declaration. Cardinal Mazarin is dead. There is no regent, no first minister, no intermediary between the king and his kingdom. Louis looks them all in the eye and says simply, "I will govern by myself." Gasps do not fill the room, but hearts quicken. No king has ruled France without a chief minister in living memory. But Louis, with his softly curling hair and gaze like polished bronze, is calm. He is not asking. He is announcing. You feel the tide shift beneath your feet. Outside the palace, life continues. Paris is alive with its usual rhythm: merchants unloading crates of oranges from Spain, bakers selling warm rolls from carts, apprentices scrubbing paint from their fingers. They do not yet realize they live in a country that is about to be drawn into the orbit of a single man. The years that follow are transformative. Louis moves the court into his orbit with precision. Ministers are chosen for loyalty and competence, not for blood or birth. Nobles who once plotted or preened now find themselves pulled into the glow of royal favour. If they do not dance to the king's rhythm, they are left in the shadows. This is the beginning of what historians call absolute monarchy. But it is not cold or cruel. It is, in many ways, theatrical. Louis understands that power is not just enforced, it is performed. He begins holding daily meetings in his bedchamber. You attend them quietly, standing near the draped wall. Every morning, courtiers gather to watch him rise, dress, and speak. The lever, as it becomes known, is not just a ritual, it is a statement. Power radiates from Louis like sunlight, and everyone who wishes to survive must reflect that light back to him. It is around this time that he is said to have uttered the words that define his legacy: L'État, c'est moi, I am the state. Whether he truly said those exact words is still debated. Some historians believe they were attributed to him later, a flourish to emphasize the monarchy's grandeur. Others argue he never needed to say them, he simply lived them. One thing is certain, France is no longer a country of factions. It is a single court orbiting one king. But not all is smooth. The scars of the Fronde still itch at the edge of Louis's memory. He remembers what it was to flee in the night, to hear the rage of the people from behind drawn curtains. That fear makes him cautious calm in appearance, but fiercely controlling beneath the surface. You notice it in the way he rewrites laws, how he appoints intendants to monitor the provinces, ensuring that even distant regions bend to his will. How the Parlement of Paris, once loud with noble voices, grows quieter under the weight of royal oversight. And yet, amid the rise of order, there is softness too. On one golden afternoon, you find Louis walking alone in the palace gardens. He stoops to gather a fallen magnolia bloom, brushes it clean, and presses it into the pages of a book he carries in his coat. It is a book of Greek philosophy, well thumbed and filled with margin notes in his elegant, slanted hand. This is not a man of brute rule. He reads, he writes, he dances, he understands the soul of France, and he intends to shape it in his image. The court begins to change, slowly at first. Poetry is encouraged. Music flows through the corridors at dusk. Ballet becomes not just entertainment, but statecraft. Louis himself dances the lead in productions, his movements precise, his presence magnetic. The courtiers watch with admiration and unease. The king is not merely ruling, he is becoming France itself. Still, questions linger in scholarly circles. Was Louis driven by a deep sense of divine mission, or was he simply haunted by childhood weakness, forever determined to prove himself? You walk with that question, tucked quietly in your thoughts, as Louis begins to look beyond the palace walls toward a vision rising in the fields outside Paris, a place where the sun can shine without shadow, where power can live, fully exposed, without the dark memories of rebellion. Versailles. But that comes later. For now, as the fire burns low in the royal study, you sit beside the king as he writes his thoughts in careful, practiced strokes. He closes the inkpot, rises without a word, and retires to bed. You follow him down the corridor, past flickering lanterns and sleeping guards. In the stillness, you can almost hear the gears of history turn. The sun is rising. Morning arrives wrapped in golden mist. The scent of lavender drifts on the breeze as you awaken just outside Paris, near the humble hunting lodge of Versailles. There is dew on the grass and a faint rustling in the hedges. You stretch slowly, standing at the edge of a vision not yet realized, a dream forming in the mind of a monarch who now holds all the levers of power. Louis is no longer the cautious boy king. He's 23 now, with the long curls and almond-shaped eyes that painters find easy to glorify. His posture is perfect, his voice steady, and his will immovable. He has decided that the court will no longer be allowed to breathe freely in Paris, surrounded by the distractions and plots of the capital. He will bring them here, to the countryside. He will build a palace so splendid, so orderly, so suffused with his own image, that it will bend every noble to his rhythm. The transformation begins with quiet orders. A wing is added, then another. Courtiers scoff at first. Versailles, the damp, remote estate surrounded by swampland and wild deer. They murmur in salons that the king is isolating himself, that no one will follow him so far from the real seat of influence, but they are wrong. You stand by as shipments of marble and gold leaf arrive. Architects work by torchlight. Gardeners dig trenches in geometric lines, their hands blistered and muddy as they carry out designs drawn to mathematical perfection. Nothing here is random. Every bush, every path, every pond is ordered like a kingdom in miniature. Louis does not merely want a palace. He wants a stage, a mirror, and a machine. By 1664, Versailles is no longer a curiosity. It is a statement. The king hosts the Plaisir de l'Île Enchantée, a week-long festival of theatre, opera, fireworks, and games. Noble arrive in droves, their coaches rattling through the outer lanes. You watch as they disembark, faces full of awe and curiosity. The event is a triumph, and from this moment on, Versailles ceases to be a lodge. It becomes the heart of France. Louis walks the colonnades with you in the early morning hours, inspecting every detail. He comments on symmetry, on acoustics, on where light falls in the hall at dusk. You realize slowly that this is not mere vanity, it is governance. The king is creating a world in which every eye sees what he wants it to see. Every breath is drawn at his tempo, and yet, even here, in this gilded world, small moments of humanity remain. One afternoon, you pass Louis in the orangery. He is barefoot, of all things, and laughing softly with the young page who has dropped an armful of lemons. The boy scrambles, apologizing, but Louis kneels to help him gather the fruit. For a moment, the king is not the sun, but a man warm and present. Historians have puzzled over these glimpses. Was it genuine kindness, a well-rehearsed performance? Perhaps even Louis himself wasn't always sure. You sit by the reflecting pool as dusk deepens. The air is filled with the sound of fountains and the distant calls of songbirds returning to roost. Versailles is growing, transforming daily, and soon it will demand not just admiration, but obedience. To secure this obedience, Louis begins drawing the nobility to him like moths to flame. They are invited, required, in truth, to take up residence at Versailles. The further they are from their provincial estates, the less they can conspire or build power of their own. Here, under the chandeliers and watchful eyes, they become courtiers instead of rivals. You watch the transformation with fascination. Men who once commanded armies now bow and smile, anxious over the placement of a cravat or the precision of a morning bow. Women navigate an intricate code of appearance, allegiance, and whispered rivalry. Every glance, every step, every word become a performance. It is magnificent and exhausting. Some historians argue that Louis engineered this life to trap his nobles in silken cages, distracted, dependent, harmless. Others see a man seeking order in a world he once saw unravel into chaos. And you feel both truths flicker in his gaze. Late at night, you pass the king's private chapel. Inside, he kneels alone, head bowed. The stained glass washes him in blue and gold. His lips move in silent prayer, or perhaps in silent planning. The next day, he will rise and smile and rule. But tonight, beneath the high vaults and soft candlelight, he is just a man beneath the weight of a crown no one else can carry. Versailles is no longer just a place, it is a world, and its sun is rising higher each day. You awaken to the echo of footfalls down a marble corridor. The sun is just cresting the treetops beyond Versailles, casting long beams of gold through tall windows. You follow the rhythm of the day like all others here, structured, precise, as if even the birds outside obey the timetables of the king. The palace is alive with ceremony. You stand beside a heavy curtain as the royal lever begins. Servants enter with measured steps, preparing Louis's garments. Nobles gather, some allowed closer than others, each position reflecting their place in the social cosmos that Louis has so carefully constructed. This is not just a morning ritual, it is a daily affirmation that everything, every thread of silk, every glance, every murmur centers on the king. Louis rises from his bed as sunlight pierces the room. He greets the nobles with a nod. They beam as if touched by the divine. In truth, Louis has spent years perfecting this theatre. It is power through rhythm, majesty through routine. You walk beside him as he moves through his day, his presence calming yet commanding. His voice is never raised. His words are carefully measured, like drops of water onto still parchment. His ministers report. Scribes trail behind with notes, and a dozen watchful eyes record every detail. Even a raised eyebrow from the king can send ripples through court. It is in these years that his famous phrase begins to echo l'état. C'est moi. I am the state. Did he truly say it? Scholars still debate. Some believe it was uttered during a court challenge. Others think it was invented later by admirers or critics. But it hardly matters. Louis embodies the idea whether or not the words left his lips. No law is passed without his approval. No policy enacted without his vision. The church bows to his authority. Foreign ambassadors tremble at his favour or disdain. France becomes a single vessel, and he, the wind that fills its sails. But even in this tightly ordered world, small curiosities persist. One afternoon, in a moment you're sure was never recorded, you find Louis inspecting the kitchens. He listens to a cook explain how a sauce is thickened. He nods, takes a wooden spoon, and tastes it himself. Then, surprisingly, he offers a suggestion. Not as a king, but as a man who enjoys the alchemy of flavour. This gentle eccentricity, the king with a cook's curiosity, offers a glimpse of the humanity beneath the robe of state. You find yourself smiling, yet not all smiles in France are genuine. The centralised monarchy has begun to strain certain parts of society. The provinces, especially those farthest from Versailles, feel the pull of control. Taxes rise to support the grandeur of court, the military, and Louis's expanding ambitions. Peasants grumble, merchants adjust prices. Some nobles, especially those still living on distant estates, begin to quietly resent their exclusion from the king's golden world. Louis knows. He hears everything, and he tightens the reins with subtle grace. He expands the intendant system and network of loyal administrators who report directly to him. These men bypass traditional local powers, ensuring that taxes, justice, and law flow as intended. France becomes a latticework of surveillance and order. One official writes, "The king's eyes are in every corner of the realm," and so they are. Still, scholars wonder, was Louis simply trying to protect the stability of France? Or did he fear sharing power so deeply that he smothered it wherever it arose? As always, the truth may be more textured. You see in him a man shaped by early chaos rebellion, exile, uncertainty, and determined to never again feel out of control. Versailles, the court rituals, the strict hierarchy, they are not just vanity, they are armour. Yet, as the crown grows heavier with time, you see small signs of wear. Louis's legs ache from years of dancing and marching. He limps slightly now, though only in private. He still attends the ballet, still rises each morning with the same commanding grace. But at night, when the fires are low and the doors are closed, he rubs his joints with a quiet wince. There is one night in particular that lingers in your memory. The king sits at a writing desk, quill in hand, composing a letter. His brow is furrowed, his eyes tired. He pauses, looks out the window at the moonlit fountains of Versailles, and murmurs, "Order is peace, even if they do not see it now. You do not interrupt. You only stand silently as history pens itself in ink and candlelight. Outside, the world admires France's golden glow, but inside, the king knows that light must be constantly tended, every flame watched, every wick trimmed, and so the Sun King burns on brilliant, disciplined, and alone at the centre of his own creation. You awaken to the scent of soil and citrus. The wind that slips through the corridors of Versailles this morning carries with it something unusual, not the perfume of powdered wigs or wax-polished floors, but the sweet tang of disturbed earth, trimmed hedges, and crushed lavender leaves. You find yourself not in the palace but in the gardens. Beyond the grand galleries, mirrors, and salons lies a world just as carefully curated rows of hedges cut with geometric precision, vast fountains orchestrated to dance at set intervals, statues poised in mythological stillness. You walk along gravel paths while the first gardeners of the day begin their work. Rakes scrape gently, wheelbarrows creak. This is André Lenotre's domain gardener to the Sun King and the architect of nature itself. Louis's vision for Versailles did not stop at its golden gates. He wished to extend his order outward to shape nature as he shaped his court. Lenotre, with his patient brilliance, understood this. You observe them walk together one early afternoon, maps of soil and stone spread across a table in the orangery. Louis does not merely approve plans, he offers ideas. He discusses the sightlines from his bedchamber, the way the morning mist rolls off the ornamental lake, the symbolism of Apollo rising from the fountains. You realize these gardens are not for pleasure, they are for power. Each hedge, each pool, each blooming orange tree brought in from Spain tells a story. The king controls not just men, but nature itself. The gardens of Versailles are a political statement, beauty as domination, symmetry as control, water as spectacle. And what a spectacle they are! On festival days, fountains roar to life, fed by an elaborate network of reservoirs, pipes, and mechanical ingenuity. Courtiers gather in silk and satin, their fans fluttering like birds as music plays and dancers twirl on polished stages under the open sky. But behind the illusion lies relentless work. Hundreds of labourers manage these gardens, pruning and planting, sweeping and adjusting. The king's walks through the grounds are carefully timed so that everything appears in perfect bloom. If a tree begins to wither, it is replaced overnight. If a pond reflects too little light, its surface is adjusted. Historians still marvel at how much of the king's attention was lavished on the gardens. Some even argue he saw them as an extension of his own body. Others suggest it was his means of escaping the suffocating rituals of court life. You catch a hint of this one evening. Louis walks alone by the Grand Canal. The sun is setting behind him, and his silhouette stretches long across the water. He stops, watches a bird dive low over the surface, and says to no one in particular, even the sky obeys if you understand its rhythm. The sky, of course, does no such thing, but Louis has spent his life convincing others that it does. Still, there are cracks hidden but widening. Beneath the lush surface of Versailles, debt accumulates. The cost of the gardens, the palace, the endless entertainments, all of it demands coin. Taxes increase. Officials struggle to balance opulence with administration. And while France dazzles itself in silken splendour, its neighbours watch carefully. England, the Holy Roman Empire, the Dutch Republic, all see Versailles not just as a palace, but as a challenge, a symbol of Bourbon ambition. The Sun King knows this. He begins to shift more focus toward military preparations. Plans are drawn, maps studied, but he never strays far from his gardens. There's a quiet moment late one summer night. You find Louis seated on a bench beneath a canopy of plane trees. His wig is removed, his boots are dusty. A servant stands a few paces back, holding a lantern. The king gazes upward. The stars never move out of place. He murmurs, "Perhaps that is why we love them." You sit beside him in silence, not to speak, only to share in the stillness. The next morning the fountains burst forth again. The courtiers return. The dancers glide across the marble. The gardeners work double shifts, and Louis, always watching, smiles as it all unfolds. Versailles is not finished. It never will be, because the sun never truly sets. It simply moves to another corner of the sky. The morning light spills across a corridor of polished mirrors. You awaken within the luminous centre of the most iconic space in the palace, La Galerie de Glace. The Hall of Mirrors. It stretches before you like a dream. The chandeliers motionless in the early hush, and beyond the tall windows, golden sunlight dapples the gardens of Versailles. The hall is newly completed, a wonder of craftsmanship and symbolism. You walk slowly across its echoing floor, past gilded mouldings and walls lined with mirror after mirror, each one capturing and reflecting not just light, but power. It was Louis's vision, and he has brought it to life with the help of Jules Hardouin Mansart, his architect of grandeur. Together, they have transformed a wing of the palace into this radiant gallery, nearly 240 feet long, lined with 357 mirrors directly facing tall, arched windows. It is a place where guests and ambassadors alike must see themselves reflected in the gaze of the king. Here, diplomacy and ceremony play out like theatre. A visiting noble from the east stands slack-jawed before the endless reflections. An ambassador from Genoa bows 3 times, just as protocol demands, though the king remains seated. This is not arrogance. It is architecture as politics Louis's power, made visible and multiplied. And yet, in the early hours before the crowds arrive, this place is quiet, peaceful, even. You sit beneath a candelabra and listen to your own breath. There's a strange intimacy in being alone here, as if the mirrors themselves remember every sigh, every whisper passed through these halls. Louis, too, comes here alone sometimes. You've seen him walk its length with his hands clasped behind his back, moving slowly, deliberate, not admiring, not surveying, but thinking. In the mirrors, he sees the kingdom he has built, and perhaps, somewhere beneath that measured gaze, he wonders how long its image will last. Versailles is now the beating heart of the nation. everything that matters flows through it. Nobles, artists, engineers, composers, and scribes. You pass Lully in the music room one day, the composer brushing ash from his lapel as he prepares a new opera. His melodies echo across the corridors, light as lace. And yet, court life is not all performance. There is pressure here, endless pressure. You see it in the faces of young courtiers who arrive with hope, only to find themselves lost in a labyrinth of etiquette and expectation. A wrong bow, a missed curtsy, a compliment delivered too early or too late. At Versailles, mistakes are remembered. Louis watches it all, not with cruelty, but with the unyielding discipline of a man who believes in order above all else. You witness a telling moment during a royal supper. The Duke spills a goblet of wine. Silence falls. All eyes turn to the king. He does not frown, nor does he speak. Instead, he lifts his own glass slowly, drinks, and continues speaking about crop reports in Normandy. The gesture is both forgiveness and warning. All things must flow without disruption. And while the court dances, France marches. Beyond the palace walls, Louis builds a military machine. His reforms, centralized, disciplined, ruthless in efficiency, are reshaping the very idea of a standing army. The uniforms are standard, the training rigorous. The supply lines dependable, France is ready to expand. In 1667, Louis launches the War of Devolution, staking a claim on Spanish Netherlands through his wife's inheritance. You stand with him as he examines maps by candlelight, his finger tracing the route through Flanders. It is a brief conflict, but a significant one. France gains land. The world takes notice. A curious detail remains from this war, a set of small wooden models of the captured towns, handcrafted and kept in Louis's personal study. He studies them as others might a child's toy collection, not for amusement, but as reminders of what has been taken, and perhaps what remains. Historians continue to puzzle over Louis's motivations. Was this about glory strategy, or simply the restless energy of a monarch who had mastered his court and now sought to master the continent? The truth, you sense, is layered. There is a night, not long after the signing of peace, when Louis lingers on a balcony overlooking the garden. A shooting star arcs across the sky, and you hear him murmur to himself, "Even the heavens move without being asked." He believes, perhaps, that he too must move or be left behind. And so the palace grows. The wars begin. The mirrors reflect. The Sun King stands at the centre of it all, untiring, unwavering, unshaken, at least for now. The hush of dawn falls gently on the gilded salons of Versailles. You awaken to the soft rustle of skirts, the murmur of conversation, the distant sound of a harpsichord echoing through the corridors. Today will not be about war or politics. Today, you drift into a world of fans and perfume, of whispered rivalries and elaborate gestures where love and etiquette move side by side like dancers in a never-ending ballet. The court of Louis XIV has become not just a place of governance, but the stage upon which the entire elite of France must perform. Every moment is orchestrated, every word carefully chosen. There are unspoken rules here, rules that govern who may sit, who may speak, even who may approach the king without first being spoken to, and no aspect of court life is more intricate or more treacherous than the games of affection. Louis has been married since 1660 to Marie-Thérèse of Spain, a quiet and devout queen who rarely seeks attention. She fulfills her duties with dignity-bearing children, attending state ceremonies, but she does not hold the king's heart. That affection wanders elsewhere. You follow it first to Louise de la Vallière, a shy and poetic young woman who becomes one of Louis's earliest loves. You watch as she rides beside him through the gardens, her laughter light, her gaze downcast. She is sincere, perhaps too sincere, and when her relationship with the king becomes public, she is shamed by her own conscience more than by the court. Eventually, she retreats from Versailles entirely, entering a convent, a quiet end to a tender chapter. But love in the Sun King's world never rests for long. You soon observe the rise of Madame de Montespan, beautiful, clever, and fiercely ambitious. She becomes not just Louis's mistress, but his advisor, his confidant, his queen in all but name. Her apartments at Versailles are lavish, her influence undeniable. Together, they have several children, who are later legitimized and raised with every advantage. Court life bends around her. Poets compose verses in her honor. Ministers seek her favor. But with power comes scrutiny. Whispers of jealousy swirl in the salons. You hear rumors of dark practices of potions and spells, of the infamous affair of the poisons, in which members of the nobility are implicated in a network of fortune-tellers and alchemists. Madame de Montespan is never officially condemned, but the whispers never fade. Eventually, her influence wanes, replaced by a quieter presence, Madame de Maintenon. You see her at first in the background, governess to the king's children, pious, intelligent, calm. Over time, she becomes his closest companion. Their relationship, though discreet, grows into something enduring. It is widely believed that they marry in secret, though no document confirms it. She never becomes queen. She never seeks to. She simply remains beside him, behind him. Historians still debate the depth of her influence. Some say she tempered Louis's ambitions. Others believe she encouraged his more austere policies, particularly in matters of faith. But to you, observing the quiet glances, the shared silences, it is clear she gave him peace, and all around them the rituals continue. Each day begins with the lever, each evening ends with the coucher, the ceremonial tucking in of the king. You watch courtiers wait hours for the chance to pass him a towel, or hand him a shirt, or merely be seen in his presence. There is a strange, almost hypnotic grace to it all. A nobleman spends his day not governing, but writing verses. A duchess commissions a portrait not to celebrate herself, but to flatter the king. Lives revolve not around passion or principle, but proximity to sunlight. You wander the salons at night, candlelight flickering on gold leaf. You overhear laughter, sighs, the clink of crystal goblets. Behind every smile is calculation. Behind every compliment, a maneuver. And yet, it is not cruel, just inevitable. Versailles is a universe, and Louis is its gravitational centre, but even the most brilliant sun must cast shadows. You come across a lonely figure on a balcony, once a favoured courtier, now quietly fading. He stares across the gardens and says to you, "Here, one must shine, or disappear." He offers no bitterness, only understanding. The next day, he's gone, sent to an ambassadorial post in a distant province. The king remembers his name, but only briefly. Still, there are moments of humour in this finely wound world. One afternoon, during a formal meal, a nobleman's wig slips off and lands squarely in a tureen of soup. The entire room freezes. Louis looks up, then smiles. "Ah," he says softly, "a new recipe." Perhaps the room exhales. Laughter bubbles up like spring water. The nobleman, red-faced but relieved, bows low in gratitude. It is the only joke of the evening, but it is enough to sustain his reputation for weeks. You smile too, because in this court of mirrors and rules, even a spoonful of soup can become legend. The night deepens, harpsichords fall silent, perfume fades into the stillness. You retreat down the marble corridors, your slippers quiet against the stone, as the flickering candlelight catches the last notes of laughter drifting beneath painted ceilings. Love, power, routine, ambition, all swirl gently in the air like dust in a sunbeam, and the king, always watching, always composing, keeps his court spinning in perfect time. The morning comes with distant thunder, not from the sky, but from the ground. You awaken to the distant thrum of horses, the muffled shuffle of boots in formation, and the sharp clatter of armour being polished. Versailles, ever the stage for elegance and ritual, now echoes with the quiet rhythms of preparation. War is coming again, and the Sun King is ready to extend his reach. You walk alongside Louis as he surveys maps spread across an oak table in the war room newly constructed just off the north wing. The War of Devolution had proven a successful test, a first ripple across the surface of Europe, but it was only the beginning. Now, in 1672, Louis launches a much larger campaign against the Dutch Republic. He believes it will be swift. The Dutch are wealthy, yes, but small, fragmented, vulnerable. The French army is the most professional in Europe now, uniformed, drilled, and well fed. It moves like a machine, its heart beating to the rhythm of the king's vision. You see it in Louis's notes, meticulous orders for bridge building, supply chains, even the medical care of the wounded. This is no amateur's campaign. It is the work of a man who rules as he gardens with measured lines, symmetry, and the quiet certainty of dominion. Yet, the war does not unfold as expected. The Dutch open their dikes, flooding their own lands to halt the French advance. You stand with Louis in a field outside Utrecht as he watches his soldiers sink knee-deep into marsh. His brow furrows not in anger, but in calculation. He studies the flooded horizon in silence, then orders a reconfiguration of the supply line. The water is not our enemy, he says, only the delay. Back in Versailles, the war is filtered through layers of silk and formality. Victories are painted in grand murals, statues are erected. Poets compare Louis to Alexander, to Caesar. The court dances, seemingly unaware or perhaps intentionally blind to the strain war places on the country. But you see signs in provincial letters delivered late at night. Farmers write of a rising grain prices, of sons conscripted, of bridges swept away by overuse. In salons, whispers rise too quiet to be treason, but sharp enough to slice. Not everyone believes this expansion is glory. Still, the Sun King does not waver. He surrounds himself with able generals Condé, Turenne, Luxembourg, and takes a visible role in their planning. He does not command from afar. You travel with him to the front lines more than once. You see him kneel in a muddy tent, cloaked against the chill, discussing tactics over a fire with maps pinned to the tent wall by daggers. There is a quiet moment during one such campaign. A soldier, barely 16, offers the king a piece of dry bread from his rations. Louis accepts it solemnly and eats it in full view of the regiment. The boy beams. It is said that the tale spread like wildfire through the troops' proof, perhaps that even legends need to eat. And yet, war brings shadows. You pass a field one morning that had, the week before, been green and golden with barley. Now it is charred. The homes nearby are empty, their doors swinging in the wind. War spares nothing, not even the beauty Louis so treasures. The Dutch war drags on longer than planned. England and Spain shift their alliances. France, though strong, begins to feel the weight of prolonged conflict. In 1678, peace is finally signed in Nijmegen. France retains territory but at a cost. Leaves coin, patience, and in the halls of Versailles, the victory is polished until it gleams. A ball is held, trumpets sound, the hall of mirrors reflects triumph. Louis enters in full regalia velvet, gold thread, and diamonds that catch every glint of candlelight. The court erupts in applause. You stand near the colonnade, watching as courtiers bow low. But you also see something else. Louis's eyes do not gleam with conquest. They are distant, perhaps tired. He lifts his wine, smiles politely, and lets the evening unfold. Only later, in the quiet of his study, does he allow the fatigue to settle across his shoulders like a cloak. Historians often debate whether the wars were a manifestation of Louis's desire for dominance, or whether he saw them as necessary expressions of strength in a world where power was always hungry. You sense the answer lies somewhere in between. One night, as the palace sleeps, Louis walks alone in the courtyard, his footsteps echoing off the marble. He looks skyward, where stars pierce the velvet dark. It is not enough to be admired. He murmurs, one must also be feared. And then, as if catching himself, he adds, but not too much. The war has ended, for now, but the sun has not yet reached its zenith. More battles lie ahead, more victories, more losses. But tonight, the palace is quiet, and you drift asleep beneath the high ceilings, the scent of gunpowder and roses still faint in the air. The evening falls gently across the gilded rooftops of Versailles. The orange glow of sunset glimmers in the window panes, and the fountains in the gardens slow their dance. You awaken to a stillness unlike the others. The court is subdued. The music has faded. Even the footfalls of the servants seem muffled by something heavy in the air. You walk with soft steps past marble busts and painted ceilings, following a hush that leads to the Queen's apartments. Marie-Thérèse, Queen of France, wife of Louis for more than 2 decades, lies in her chamber. The king stands by her bedside, his eyes unreadable. You've seen him command armies, design cities, and choreograph entire societies. But here, beside his ailing wife, he is quieter, still, human. She had not been powerful in courtly affairs, not witty like Montespan, not pious like Maintenon, but she was always there, dutiful, kind, dignified in her restraint. And now, her final breath slips into the silence, like a leaf carried off by the breeze. Louis turns to those present and says simply, "This is the first trouble she has ever given me." You're not sure whether it is sorrow or habit that guides his voice. In the days that follow, the court dons mourning attire, black lace replaces powder blue, and conversations grow shorter, more formal. The Queen is buried quietly at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, where centuries of French monarchs have found their rest. The ceremony is modest, in accordance with her wishes, and yet Beneath the still surface, the court adjusts itself, for while the Queen has passed, the orbit around Louis remains unchanged. The court continues, the rituals resume. A moment of grief, wrapped in velvet and protocol, soon gives way to the tides of political life. But in the king's chambers, you notice a shift. He spends more time alone. His walks through the gardens are slower. He lingers in the chapel longer after Mass, and most notably, Madame de Maintenon is now by his side more frequently, not with the flirtation of earlier lovers, but with a quieter companionship, as if she carries not only conversation, but the weight of memory. It is widely believed, though never officially recorded, that the king and Maintenon marry in secret. Sometime in the early 1680s, she does not become queen. There is no grand proclamation, but those who know understand. You see her influence gently unfold across court life. Decorum sharpens, dress grows more modest, religious observance becomes more pronounced. The gaiety of earlier years fades into something more subdued, more thoughtful. One afternoon, you hear Maintenon speaking to a young courtier who'd been mocking a priest's sermon. Her voice is calm, but unwavering. Laughter has its place, monsieur, but not at the cost of reverence. It is clear that her presence signals a new tone for Versailles. And Louis, now in his mid-40s, embraces it. He begins to see himself not only as a political ruler, but as a moral one. He supports the arts still, yes, but favours those that uplift piety and virtue. The theatre remains, but with fewer biting comedies. The ballets continue, but less frequently. Pleasure is replaced by purpose, yet the sorrow of loss lingers. Louis had many children with Marie-Thérèse, but few survived into adulthood. His legitimate son, the Grand Dauphin, lives, but others have been lost along the way. Illness, miscarriages, accidents. It is a quiet stream of grief, flowing beneath the surface of the court. You walk the halls and pass portraits of infants long buried, their tiny faces rendered in oil, forever young. Maintenon has no children of her own, but she takes a close interest in the king's illegitimate offspring, now legitimized, educated, and groomed for court. She founds a school at Saint-Cyr for young noble women without fortune, providing them with education, structure, and dignity. You visit it one day, following her carriage through the countryside. The girls line up in clean rows, curtsying with shy smiles. Maintenon speaks with them kindly, listens to their questions, and insists they be taught more than just manners. They must understand scripture, history, poetry. It is one of the few places where you see her truly relax. Back in Versailles, Louis continues to refine his role. He publishes the king's instruction to the Dauphin, a guide for his heir on how to rule. It is not a document of conquest, but of order detailing how to balance grace with strength, piety with majesty. Historians still debate how deeply Louis felt the loss of his queen. Some say he barely paused, that she was always a political match, never a romantic one. Others see in his turn toward religion a soul that sought comfort in structure after grief. You, having walked beside him in the quiet hours, suspect both are true. There is one night, years later, when Louis visits her tomb at Saint-Denis alone. No procession, no fanfare. He kneels for a long time. When he rises, he does not speak. He simply looks up at the vaulted ceiling where stone angels seem to weep silently in the candlelight. Then he returns to Versailles, to the mirrors, the marble, the ministers, and to the long work of legacy. The sky above Versailles is bright, but the mood within its walls is heavy. You awaken to the tolling of bells, slow, resonant, echoing through the long corridors like a distant drumbeat. Not a celebration this time, not for war, nor wedding, nor victory. Today, France changes in a way that cannot be undone. It is October of 1685, Louis XIV. Now the undisputed sovereign of an empire at its peak has made a decision that will shape generations to come. He revokes the Edict of Nantes, a decree once signed in 1598 by his grandfather, Henry IV, that granted French Protestants, known as Huguenots, the right to worship without fear. Now, with a stroke of the pen, that right is gone. You stand beside the king's writing desk, watching as his signature dries upon the parchment. Around him are bishops, councillors, and advisers, many of them nodding in solemn agreement. Louis believes, deeply and sincerely, that religious unity is the cornerstone of political stability. France must be one in faith, as it is in law and in loyalty. And yet, outside this chamber, the tremors begin. The Huguenots, hundreds of thousands of them, are stunned. Some flee immediately, gathering what little they can carry. Others wait, hoping the policy will soften. But it does not. Churches are shuttered, schools are closed, ministers are arrested. And in the coming years, more than 200,000 will escape the kingdom entirely. Tradesmen, scholars, merchants, artisans, taking with them skills, wealth, and stories. You walk past empty storefronts in provincial towns, blacksmiths' forges cold, looms still. The loss is not just spiritual, it is economic, cultural, personal. Louis sees none of this directly. He remains convinced he has done what is right for the church, for the throne, for God. Historians still debate the true reasons behind the revocation. Was it faith, political pressure, a bid to please the Catholic clergy and secure unity? Perhaps it was all of these. Perhaps it was the influence of Madame de Maintenon, who encouraged piety over pluralism. You remember one private conversation between them, quiet, near the chapel, lit only by flickering candlelight. Maintenon said softly, "A house divided cannot endure." And Louis nodded, his hands folded in thought. But the consequences ripple far beyond the chapel. You hear it in whispers along the Seine, in the hush of a servant who no longer sings psalms in the morning, in the silent prayer of a merchant whose family has vanished in the night. There is one moment you cannot forget. In a small village in the south, you watch a Huguenot mother slip a locket into her daughter's hand. Inside is a tiny piece of paper with a verse from the Psalms, too dangerous now to keep openly. They will leave before sunrise, crossing into Switzerland through forest trails. You do not know if they will make it, but you know they must try. Back in Versailles, the gardens remain immaculate. The court continues its dances, but you begin to feel a subtle shift. The laughter is quieter, the music more formal. The Sun King still shines, but more distantly, more coldly. It is not that joy has vanished, but the warmth has changed. And yet, Louis's confidence never wavers. He commissions new religious works, paintings of saints, stained glass windows, sacred music that echoes through the chapel with serene majesty. He attends Mass daily. He receives communion with reverence, and he insists that his children and grandchildren do the same. You begin to sense a paradox. Here is a king who builds schools for girls and hospitals for soldiers, who funds academies of science and opera, who believes in order, harmony, and human dignity. And yet here, too, is a king who drives his own people into exile for the sake of religious conformity. Which is the true Louis? You ask this silently one evening, walking the grand gallery alone, your steps echoing under the frescoes that proclaim his victories, his glory, his divine right. The mirrors reflect your image endlessly, and somewhere in those reflections, perhaps the answer shimmers just out of reach. There's a small, human detail worth remembering. Around this time, the king develops a fondness for a stray spaniel that wanders into the palace grounds. A ragged thing, with one ear torn and fur matted from rain. Servants are aghast, but Louis insists it be fed, cleaned, and allowed to stay near him during his evening readings. He names it Moufette, and for many weeks the little dog follows him loyally, trotting behind him in silence, curling up beside his chair. It is a rare tenderness, unrecorded in most histories, but one you do not forget, because even amidst policy and power, battle and belief, there are always quiet corners of unexpected humanity. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes is one of the darkest chapters of his reign, a decision made with unwavering purpose and incalculable cost. And still the court moves on. A ballet is staged in the marble court. A marriage is arranged between distant cousins. The fountains of Versailles burst to life, illuminated by firelight and accompanied by trumpets. You step back into the corridor, watching the nobles take their places, and above them all, at the far end of the Hall of Mirrors, Louis stands resplendent in gold and lace, his gaze calm, his will undimmed. But somewhere beyond the gates, the wind carries the footsteps of those now walking toward foreign shores. You awaken in the hush before dawn, when the air is cool and still, and the statues in the garden seem to lean forward in the dark, waiting for light. Today, you are drawn outdoors, not to the court, nor to the chapel, but to the sprawling masterpiece that stretches beyond Versailles' marble walls, the gardens, not merely lawns and trees, but living declarations of Louis XIV's taste, his discipline, and his quiet demand that even nature itself obey the hand of a king. You step carefully along gravel paths cut in straight lines, where even the smallest twig out of place is swiftly corrected by dozens of unseen gardeners. The landscape is not wild. It is geometric, ordered, and entirely man-made. At the heart of this vision is André Le Nôtre, the royal landscape architect whose designs mirror the king's ideology: clarity, control, and perfect symmetry. The gardens were not built all at once. You recall how it began, with small clearings and simple water basins. But as Louis's ambitions grew, so too did his empire of green. Now, there are canals where swans glide beneath rows of poplars. Parterres bloom in mathematical patterns, roses and lavender laid out like embroidery, and the fountains sing with movement and sound. There are hundreds of them, each powered by an intricate web of aqueducts, reservoirs, and siphons stretching deep into the countryside. One, in particular, captures your attention today, the Fountain of Apollo. In it, the sun god Louis's chosen symbol emerges from the waves in a chariot, horses rearing as dawn breaks over the water. The sculpture is radiant in its intent. You feel the symbolism wash over you, Louis as Apollo, Louis as bringer of order, Louis as the dawn itself. But beneath the beauty, there is also effort, immense, invisible, ceaseless. You speak with one of the garden workers at the break of day. His hands are calloused, his shirt damp with early labour. Every leaf, he says softly, has a place, and every day it must be returned there. He smiles as he says it, not bitter, only respectful, as if he too feels the rhythm of something larger than himself. You begin to understand how the garden is more than beauty. It is politics in greenery. The nobility may be dazzled by fountains and fireworks, but Louis sees beyond their awe. He has brought them here not for entertainment but for containment. At Versailles, nobles are kept close, their days filled with rituals and distractions. The gardens are part of this design, a labyrinth of scheduled strolls and orchestrated encounters. Duels become rare. Alliances are built not in battlefield tents, but along hedge-lined paths and beside marble ponds. Some historians call it the domestication of the aristocracy, and it works. Powerful lords who once commanded armies now argue over who may hold the king's candlestick in the morning, or who may sit closer during a walk in the orangery. You witness it one afternoon, a subtle quarrel between two dukes about the sequence of their entrance in a fountain viewing procession. Neither raises his voice, but their eyes speak volumes. Meanwhile, Louis remains at the centre of it all. He walks the paths often, rarely hurried. He pauses to watch children sail miniature ships in the canal. He comments on a hedge that's grown too high. He gives a coin to a gardener whose roses have bloomed early. There's a quiet moment during one of these walks that you cherish. Louis stops near the edge of the mirror pool, watching his reflection ripple with the wind. He says softly, "A man must shape his world, or be shaped by it." Then he turns to continue his walk, as if the thought were as ordinary as asking for tea. And perhaps, to him, it is. Yet not everyone adores the gardens. Some foreign visitors whisper that the scale is excessive, that the rigid designs lack the wildness of nature's own art. But Louis does not flinch from criticism. He believes the gardens are a reflection of a well-ordered kingdom, clean, balanced, and brilliant in form. Still, you begin to notice signs of fatigue beneath the grandeur, the endless maintenance, the cost, the labour, the water is beginning to weigh on the treasury. More taxes are raised, more workers are pressed into service. The king's budget, like his realm, stretches thin. You walk through the groves at dusk and find a marble statue of Diana, goddess of the hunt, with a chipped ankle. No one has repaired it yet. A small thing, but it speaks to a larger truth. Even perfection needs constant tending. Historians still wonder how much of Versailles, the gardens, the court, the constant performance was truly necessary. Was it all vanity, or was it survival? Was Louis creating art, or a fortress of etiquette? You've walked the paths. You've seen the hands that rake the gravel, the minds that design the sight lines, the lives caught between rose bushes and mirrors, and you know it was all of these things. As night falls, the last of the gardeners extinguishes his lantern. The fountains slow to a trickle. The hedges cast long shadows, and somewhere in the distance, a harpsichord plays a soft, steady melody. You rest beneath a stone arch, listening to the silence return to the landscape. Even here, in the most beautiful garden in Europe, stillness has its place, and the Sun King, ever watching, sleeps beneath painted ceilings, dreaming of symmetry. The wind over the rooftops of Versailles carries a sharper edge today. You awaken in the mid-1690s to the sound of carriage wheels grinding over frost-bitten stones and the muffled clang of armour being loaded into convoys bound for the frontier. The grandeur of the court still glimmers within the palace, but beyond the gates, the mood has shifted. The echoes of war have returned, and this time they will not fade so easily. France is entering the War of the League of Augsburg, often called the 9 Years' War, a conflict long in the making, born from Louis's ever-expanding ambitions and the growing anxiety of his neighbours. The coalition aligned against him is vast: the Holy Roman Empire, England, Spain, the Dutch Republic, and others, all forming a united front to curb the Sun King's reach. You watch as Louis reviews his troops, no longer the vibrant young monarch who once danced in court ballets, but now in his 50s, still sharp of mind but slower in gait. His eyes, however, remain unchanged, keen, fixed, unwavering. This war is different from the ones before, more drawn out, more complex. Theatres of battle stretch from Flanders to the Rhineland, even spilling into the colonies. It is not just a contest of land, but of will, endurance, and reputation. You accompany Louis to a council meeting deep within the palace, where military strategies are whispered over unfolded maps. Marshals point at border towns, supply lines are recalculated. The room is tense. Gone are the confident boasts of earlier campaigns. Now there is caution, cost, calculation, and yet Louis remains steadfast. He believes this war is necessary not for glory, but for security, for France to hold what it has gained, for the Bourbon legacy to endure, but the toll is mounting. You travel to the countryside one winter and see the deeper consequence of endless campaigns. Fields lie fallow, markets are quiet. Roads once bustling with trade are now scarred with trenches and the footprints of marching boots. In the village square of a small town outside Metz, you witness a woman selling her wedding band for a sack of grain. She does not cry. She only says, "Better to eat than to remember." Back in Versailles, the court carries on. Dinners are still served with silver cutlery. Dancers still glide across marble floors. But the edges are wearing thin. You see it in the strained smiles of nobles whose sons are at the front, in the silence that falls when news of a failed siege arrives during supper. And still, the king endures. One evening, you find him alone in the Hall of Battles, a gallery lined with heroic paintings of France's military triumphs. He stands before one canvas, a scene of a youthful Louis leading cavalry into victory. He does not speak, but his eyes linger. Does he miss the simpler days of conquest, or does he mourn the cost? There is debate among historians about how deeply Louis grasped the economic toll of his wars. Some argue he was blind to the suffering of the common people. Others believe he simply accepted it as the price of kingship. But you, having walked beside him, suspect he understood it and carried it silently beneath the brocade of state. And yet, he was not without moments of subtle humanity. During a brief lull in the war, he travels to the city of Dijon. There, amidst cheering crowds, he pauses to speak with a wounded veteran missing a leg. The man bows awkwardly, struggling to stay upright. Louis lifts him by the arm and says, "Your service stands straighter than any soldier." It is not a line written for theatre. He means it. Still, the war grinds on. France suffers a series of military and naval setbacks. The Grand Alliance grows more confident. By 1697, both sides are weary. The Treaty of Ryswick is signed. France must cede some of its gains. The victories are no longer so golden. The terms, no longer entirely in Louis's favour, but there is peace, for now. You walk beside Louis as he returns to Versailles. He is older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but he is not broken. If anything, he seems more resolute, his mind now turning toward the future, toward a far more complicated question. Who will succeed him? The war has revealed not just the limits of power, but the limits of time. He begins thinking not just of France, but of Spain, of dynastic marriages, of the long shadow cast by a throne without an heir. But that question of Spain, of succession, of Europe's balance still lies ahead. Tonight, as snow falls gently over the gardens, Versailles rests beneath a blanket of silence. The king walks the gallery one last time, his hands behind his back, his breath just visible in the cold air. The paintings look down upon him, still bright, still full of battle cries and banners. But he has lived them now, and he knows that history, once painted, cannot be changed. You awaken beneath a sky thick with clouds, as if the heavens themselves are holding their breath. The world has changed again. It is the early dawn of the 18th century, and the Spanish throne has fallen vacant. King Charles II of Spain, sickly, childless, and long at the edge of life, has finally died. His passing opens a question as dangerous as any cannon: who will inherit one of the most powerful empires on earth? The answer, as shaped by Charles's will, is young Philip, Duke of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV. Your feet echo in the marble halls as you follow the ripple this news sends through Versailles. Courtiers gather in whispers, ministers scurry behind closed doors, and the king, more solemn than triumphant, calls a quiet meeting in his private salon. He stands before a roaring fire and speaks with calm clarity. The Pyrenees are no more. With that, he accepts the Spanish crown on behalf of his grandson, who now becomes King Philip V of Spain. The two great Bourbon lines, French and Spanish, have drawn close, and Europe shudders. You watch as Louis's decision sends shockwaves across the continent. For the other great powers, England, the Holy Roman Empire, the Dutch Republic, this is not diplomacy, it is domination. The possibility that France and Spain, with their vast colonial holdings and immense wealth, might one day be ruled by the same family, perhaps even by the same monarch, is intolerable. And so, war begins again. The War of the Spanish Succession ignites in 1701. You feel the strain in your bones as France rallies once more, its armies bloodied but experienced, its treasury groaning, its people weary. This war will last over a decade. You stand in the royal council chamber as maps are unfurled and alliances debated. Louis no longer rides to the front himself, but his will drives the war from Versailles. His general Villars, Vendôme, and others carry out his vision. The stakes are high, not just territory, not just pride, but dynastic legacy. The early years are hopeful. Philip takes the Spanish throne, French forces hold their ground, but gradually setbacks come. Defeats at Blenheim, Ramillies, and Malplaquet rattle morale. The once invincible image of France dims. The British general, the Duke of Marlborough, proves a formidable adversary. You hear the reports arrive one by one, like distant thunderclaps in the royal study. Each time, Louis listens without outward emotion, but you see it in his shoulders, a slow weight settling there, heavier with each passing year. At home, famine stalks the land, harsh winters kill crops. Bread lines stretch long. You walk the villages and see mothers barter heirlooms for flour, priests offering thin soup to entire parishes. Versailles feels farther than ever from the rest of France, and yet, within its walls, life continues. The court is smaller now, quieter. Some nobles have left. Others have grown older, less flamboyant. Madame de Maintenon spends much of her time in private devotion. Louis, too, is more contemplative. The late nights of music and laughter have softened into evenings of quiet reading, chess, and prayer. One evening, you find him alone in the chapel, lit only by candlelight. He prays not for victory, but for clarity. His voice is low. Let the crown endure, even if I do not. Historians debate whether he feared for France or simply for the House of Bourbon. But you, standing in that moment, feel something deeper, a man confronting his own mortality, his vision challenged by time. And yet, he does not yield. He writes letters daily to his grandson in Madrid, encouraging, instructing, guiding. He makes sacrifices, offers peace proposals, refuses to abandon Philip's claim. In 1711, hope comes unexpectedly. Emperor Joseph I of Austria dies. His successor, Charles, now stands to inherit both Austria and Spain, a union just as threatening as France and Spain. The scales tip. By 1713, after years of bloodshed, the Treaty of Utrecht is signed. Peace, at last. Philip keeps the Spanish throne but must renounce any future claim to France. The Bourbons rule in Madrid, but the empires remain separate. It is not a complete victory, but it is enough. Louis has secured his dynasty, preserved his legacy. You walk with him through the gardens that spring as flowers bloom once again. His steps are slower, his cane more necessary now, but his gaze still scans the horizon with purpose. He pauses at the fountain of Latona, depicting Apollo's mother turning villagers into frogs for insulting her children. He smiles faintly and says, "A lesson in loyalty. Even the gods protect their blood." The court breathes a sigh of relief. France is battered, but not broken. The sun has not set, yet the toll is clear. Versailles, though still radiant, shows signs of wear. Gilding peels in corners. Fabrics fade. The faces of young courtiers are fewer. The chapel is fuller than the ballroom. You see in Louis now not a conqueror, but a guardian of peace, of tradition, of a kingdom aging with him. One night, as the fountains go still and the gardens sleep beneath a silver sky, he stands with you on the balcony. "It was never just about crowns or battles," he says quietly. "It was about keeping the fire lit, even when the wind rises." You nod, because you've seen it all. The rise, the glory, the cracks, and still the fire flickers on. You awaken to the sound of footsteps echoing slowly along a marble floor. It is not the hurried stride of a courtier, nor the proud march of a general. It is something quieter, deliberate, weighty. You rise and follow the sound through the cool corridors of Versailles, past the faded silk tapestries, past doorways that once buzzed with gossip and music. You find him in his study, older now, thinner, his once glorious curls dusted with grey, his movements slower but still measured, still composed. Louis XIV is approaching the end of his reign, and though the fountains still flow and the candles still glow, something in the atmosphere has changed. The palace is quieter, not hushed in fear, but softened by time. The grand performances, the diplomatic pageantry, the endless battles, they lie behind him now like books closed gently on a shelf. yet the weight of kingship has never left his shoulders. The early 18th century has not been kind. The War of the Spanish Succession is over, but the damage lingers. The treasury is strained, the people are tired, and within the royal family, grief settles like winter fog. In 1711, Louis loses his only legitimate son, the Grand Dauphin, to smallpox. You stand beside the king as the court dresses in mourning once again. He does not cry, at least not in public. But the sadness clings to him, woven into his clothes like thread. Then, just 1 year later, his eldest grandson, the Duke of Burgundy, dies along with his young wife and their eldest son. Illness sweeps through the royal apartments like a shadow. You hear the palace grow silent again, day after day, as the plague of grief seeps into its walls. Louis walks alone more often now, often in the early morning mist before the court has risen. Sometimes you follow at a distance just to be near, just to witness. You see him pause at a statue of Apollo, once the god he so readily identified with. He studies its expression, youthful, strong, eternal, but he no longer seems to see himself in it. France itself seems to have aged with him. The court is less vibrant, the nobles more subdued. Those who remain from the days of youthful dances and mirrored halls walk more slowly now, speaking in lower voices. The grandchildren of those who once flocked to Versailles now question whether its glories are still worth the cost. But Louis presses on. He commissions finishing touches to the Royal Chapel, a project long in the making. The work is completed in 1710, and you walk beside him during its first mass. The high vaulted ceilings echo with music as golden light filters through stained glass. It is a solemn space, filled not with triumph, but with reflection. Louis sits quietly in the front pew, hands clasped. You glance at his face, and for a moment you see something unexpected. Not weariness, not pride, but peace. Still, his responsibilities never end. In 1715, and knowing his time draws near, he begins to prepare for succession. His great-grandson, Louis, Duke of Anjou, just 5 years old, will be his heir. You watch as he gently instructs the child, his voice soft but firm, speaking not of glory, but of duty. "Be a peaceful prince," he says one morning. "Do not imitate me in my love of building or in my taste for war. Try to ease your people's burdens." Historians have long debated this moment. Was it regret, a final wisdom, or simply the advice of a king who'd lived long enough to see the arc of his choices? Perhaps all three. One evening, as twilight gathers and the lanterns flicker in the gallery, you see Louis pause beneath his own portrait. It is one of his favourites. He stands in full regalia, hand on hip, gaze lifted toward an invisible future. Now, in person, he stares up at it quietly. "It is strange," he says at last, "to see oneself frozen in time. You don't speak. You only stand beside him in the soft gold of dusk." That summer, he becomes ill. His leg swells, and the pain begins to overtake his days. You see him carried from chamber to chamber, still composed, still issuing orders, but thinner now, drawn and pale. Visitors come less frequently. The court grows sombre. The fountains continue, but the laughter does not. And yet, even in pain, Louis governs. He signs documents. He hears reports. He meets with priests and ministers, ensuring the machine of state continues to turn. One morning, as the light filters through the long windows, he turns to you and says, "I have loved war too much, but I have also loved France. It is not a confession, not exactly. It is simply a truth. spoken by a man who has carried a nation on his shoulders longer than most men live. You sit with him as night falls over Versailles. The wind rustles the trees in the gardens. A servant brings warm broth, which he barely touches. He closes his eyes and murmurs, "I depart." But the state remains, and you feel it that long. Golden chapter beginning to close, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. The sun rises over Versailles for what feels like the 1,000th time though this morning. Its warmth is subdued. The palace is not yet awake. You move softly through its silent corridors, where portraits of long-dead nobles gaze out across shadowed marble and dust-laced curtains. You know what is coming. Louis XIV, the Sun King, has taken to his bed. The pain in his leg has worsened, his voice has weakened, and even the daily rituals of state have ceased. You enter his chambers early, before the courtiers arrive, and find him propped gently against silk pillows, the rich canopy of his bed casting long shadows on the golden floor. He nods faintly when he sees you. This is not the man who danced as Apollo or rode at the head of armies. Yet, somehow, his presence is no less commanding. He speaks slowly now, his voice thin and dry. "It is time," he whispers. "Time to leave the world in order." You stay by his side as the days unfold. Ministers and doctors come and go. Some offer quiet prayers, others bring tinctures and herbs. None of it eases the swelling. The gangrene has spread. The doctors murmur in corners, unable to disguise their worry. You already know they cannot stop it. Louis knows too, yet even in his suffering he prepares. He summons his young heir, the great-grandson he's been grooming since the deaths of so many others in the royal line. The boy, barely old enough to speak confidently, is brought to his bedside. You are present when Louis reaches for his hand, thin fingers curling gently around the child's. He speaks to the boy not as a monarch to an heir, but as a grandfather to a grandson. "You're very young. You will have many trials. Remember always to serve your people well. Do not imitate my fondness for war. Seek peace. Protect your people, and above all, keep the faith." The room is silent. Even the courtiers bow their heads. You hear the words repeated later in salons and chambers, some with reverence, others with irony, but none can deny the weight of the moment. For Louis XIV has reigned for 72 years, the longest of any monarch in European history. An entire generation has never known another ruler. Ministers, generals, artists, enemies, all have come and gone beneath his gaze. And now, France is preparing to say goodbye. You walk through the palace in the late hours, finding traces of him everywhere, in the chapel's quiet pews, where he once knelt each morning, in the orangery, where he walked slowly in later years, savouring the scent of lemon and earth, in the hall of mirrors, where he once stood resplendent in silk. The whole court bent toward him like sunflowers. Even in the servants' quarters, you hear them speak of him, not with fear, but with familiarity. He built the palace. He watched the sun rise every day from the same window. He ate with a gold spoon, but never wasted a meal. Historians would call these small things trivial. But to you, they feel like echoes of the real man echoes that may outlast the battles and proclamations. The final hours approach with a quiet reverence. Louis asks for last rites. The sacraments are delivered. Priests pray in soft Latin tones. The scent of incense floats gently through the chamber. Outside, the courtiers wait. not for spectacle, not for inheritance, but for the end of an era. You hold his hand in the dim light of the afternoon as his breathing slows. He opens his eyes one last time, faintly smiles, and murmurs, "I am going," but the kingdom remains. Then, nothing. Only stillness. It is September 1st, 1715. A courtier enters the royal chamber, and the ritual begins. A formal declaration is read aloud, and the words echo across the polished floors. The king is dead. Long live the king. Outside the palace, the bells begin to ring, slow, sonorous, echoing across the gardens, over the city, and into the countryside. Louis XIV is gone. But everywhere around you, Versailles, France, even the gaze of Europe, you feel his presence still lingering. In every mirror, in every garden, in every whisper of what it means to rule. The king has died, and the sun has set. You awaken to a world in mourning. The curtains of Versailles are drawn. Black drapery hangs from the balconies. The fountains in the garden have been stilled. Even the air seems heavier, as if the very stones of the palace understand the magnitude of what has passed. The Sun King is gone. You walk the corridors, now filled not with music or the fluttering of fans, but the soft shuffles of courtiers dressed in black. Conversations are brief, eyes downcast. Even the famously glittering mirrors of the Galerie de Glace seem dimmer, and yet, amid the solemnity, life moves forward. Louis XIV, the longest reigning monarch in French history, has left behind a kingdom both magnificent and exhausted. His funeral is being prepared with the precision and reverence befitting a man who redefined monarchy itself. You are there as the royal carpenters construct his coffin plain, as tradition demands, made of oak and lined with lead. On the surface no crown, no jewels, no golden adornment, a simple cross and his name. His body, embalmed and dressed in state robes, lies in repose at the palace. Courtiers, clergy, and servants file past in silence, each bowing low. Even those who once resented his rule now pause with respect. The funeral procession will stretch all the way to the Basilica of Saint-Denis, the ancient resting place of France's kings. You travel with it, moving slowly, hour by hour, as the sun passes overhead and the people of France line the roads. Peasants, merchants, widows, children, they do not cheer, they do not wail, but they stand. Some bow their heads, others cross themselves, some only watch in silence, as if unsure what to feel. And how could they? This man ruled for more than 70 years. He began as a child, frightened during the Fronde. He rose as a radiant monarch of taste, grandeur and vision. He expanded France's borders, then held them. He built Versailles, then became its prisoner. He danced as Apollo, then aged into a figure of reverent solitude. He brought France to its greatest heights and its deepest burdens. Even now, historians struggle to answer the question, was Louis XIV a great king or merely a long one? You walk beside the hearse as it passes through the gates of Saint-Denis. The basilica looms tall, Gothic and cool. Inside, the monks chant low and slow. The crypt awaits. He will lie beside his father, Louis XIV, and countless monarchs before him. But his tomb is unique, because even in death, his shadow stretches far. You stay for the interment, standing quietly at the edge of the chamber. As his coffin is lowered into the tomb, the officiant speaks the traditional Latin. Here lies Louis XIV, King of France and Navarre, by the grace of God. But in the silence that follows, you hear something else. Memory, the rustle of brocade robes, the burst of fountains, the laughter of courtiers in sunlit groves, the thunder of war drums on foreign soil, the music of Lully in the marble court, the scrape of Louis's cane on the floor in his final years, all of it lingers. You return to Versailles days later, where the young new King Louis XIV, just 5 years old, is being guided through his first steps of rule. His regent, Philippe d'Orléans, will rule in his name for now. The courtiers are already shifting, new alliances forming, new ambitions stirring, but everywhere, Louis XIV remains, in every gilded panel, every fountain, every chamber and salon. His imprint endures. Versailles itself is his monument, a living cathedral to control, majesty and vision. That evening, you sit alone beneath the stars. The palace behind you flickers with candlelight. The grounds stretch vast and empty. The trees perfectly aligned as if still bowing to a king long gone. And for a moment, you close your eyes and remember him, not as the godlike figure of propaganda, nor the rigid old king of his final years, but as the young man in satin and lace, walking through a foggy morning with a garden map in one hand and a dream in the other. He shaped a world, and now the world must reshape itself around his absence. You awaken to the sound of distant church bells ringing across a pale sky. The year is 1716. Versailles breathes differently now. The great monarch is gone, and though the palace remains intact, its gardens trimmed, its halls swept, it feels as if something essential has been exhaled, like a held breath finally released. You walk the grounds slowly. Fewer people bustle about. The rooms, once bursting with courtiers and their retinues, now echo with empty space. The regency of Philippe d'Orléans has begun, governing in the name of young Louis XV. But even as France shifts into a new chapter, the shadow of the Sun King still lies across every stone. Yet today, you are not here to follow the regency. You are here to listen to the stories, those spoken softly by those who remember him. For though Louis XIV no longer walks these halls, the people around you carry his memory in 1,000 small ways. In the kitchens, an aging servant speaks of how the king used to sneak a bit of roast pigeon when the physician said no. In the library, a royal clerk dusts the spine of a volume Louis once annotated in the margins Latin phrases, underlined in his fine, slanted hand. In the chapel, an old choir boy, now a man, hums the psalms the king insisted be sung daily at Mass. Each story is a thread in a tapestry, one woven not of marble and gold, but of glances, gestures, and years. You begin to notice the tone in these stories. It is not flattery, not even reverence. It is something quieter, something like affection. For all his grandeur, Louis was also deeply human to those who served him daily. They remember not only the monarch, but the man. There's a gardener retired now, living near the edge of the property, who tells you something you've never heard before. He would visit us before dawn, some days. He says, "Just walk the paths. Say nothing. Only listen to the water move." It strikes you that this memory, unrecorded by historians, may be more real than any royal proclamation. But not all memories are warm. Outside the palace, in the broader kingdom, the legacy of Louis XIV is far more complex. The wars, so many of them have drained the treasury. The people, long pressed for taxes, now struggle beneath rising food prices and local debts. Entire regions, especially in the countryside, remember hardship more than splendour. You walk through a village outside Chartres and meet a baker who remembers how his father lost everything during the War of the Spanish Succession. "The king," he says slowly, "built something magnificent, but it was not built for us." And yet, even he bows his head when speaking of Louis's death, because Louis XIV had become more than a man. He had become a symbol of France's ambition, order and pride. To criticise him was to criticise a whole era, a whole vision of the world. You return to Versailles one afternoon as a spring rain begins to fall. The garden paths glisten, the stone steps shimmer, and as the drops tap gently against the marble balustrades, you hear voices rehearsing a court play in one of the smaller salons. They are young nobles new to the palace. None of them ever saw the Sun King in person, and yet they perform as if they had. One of them recites Louis's famous phrase "L'État, c'est moi." Another challenges it. But is that how we must live, or only how he lived? They laugh, they debate, they speak of reform, of the Regency, of the young Louis XV. You realise then that the story of the Sun King is not only in the past, it is also in the questions his reign leaves behind. What is the cost of glory? Can a kingdom survive beneath the weight of one man's vision? And when the sun sets, what then? Historians argue over these things. Of course, some paint Louis as a genius of governance, the embodiment of stability and discipline. Others call him a cautionary tale, a man whose grandeur masked the erosion beneath. But here, in the echo of his palace, you understand something deeper. Louis XIV was neither myth nor warning. He was both, a monarch who ruled not only with his crown, but with the brushstroke, the ballet step, the garden line, the glance. He built a world that mirrored him, and in doing so, revealed both his brilliance and his blindness. You sit beside the reflecting pool as the rain stops and the surface calms. The clouds part just slightly, and the sunlight returns, not as a blaze, but as a quiet shimmer across the water. You close your eyes and remember the words he once whispered. Order is peace, and now, with him gone, the world begins to wonder what peace truly means. You awaken to the soft creak of old floorboards beneath polished shoes. It is 1715 still, but the days have moved on. The bells have stopped tolling. The morning veils have been lifted. Versailles breathes again, though slower, like a great organism recovering from a long, shuddering sigh. You are no longer by the side of a king, but in the company of memory. Today, you walk not to court, but to the archives. Tucked within the palace is a chamber few courtiers ever enter, a gallery not of mirrors, but of parchment, shelves tower high, filled with decrees, edicts, letters, invitations, architectural plans, war reports, love notes, inventories of grapes grown and silks ordered. Here is the proof of Louis XIV's life not in gold, but in ink. You run your finger along the edges of a bound volume. It contains royal correspondences written in the king's own hand, elegant, firm, methodical. His script never faltered, even as his body aged. The lines speak of wheat shipments, of troop movements, of a broken water pipe in a lower fountain. Nothing was too grand or too small. This was his genius, and also his burden. Historians often say that Louis XIV was a man obsessed with control. But as you trace his words, you begin to wonder if it was something deeper. Not obsession, but duty. A sense that, if he did not hold every thread, the whole tapestry might unravel. You speak with one of the archivists, a woman whose family has served Versailles for 3 generations. She tells you that even in the final months of his life, Louis reviewed daily reports from Paris, Burgundy, even as far as New France. He wanted to know everything, she says, because he believed everything mattered, and so he built systems, ministries and councils, ordinances. He took a country fractured by war and civil unrest and gave it spine and structure, but not without cost. You take a carriage beyond the palace grounds and find yourself among farmers and weavers whose lives were shaped by decisions made in rooms they never saw. Some remember him kindly as a man of strength who gave France unity. Others speak with weariness, recounting the taxes, the forced conversions, the decades of conflict. He gave us pride, one man says, but he never gave us rest. In a wayside chapel, you come across a mural faded with time, Louis crowned by angels, holding a sword and a scepter. It is a scene repeated in countless engravings and tapestries, but the real man was more complicated. You recall the moments of tenderness, the way he helped a boy gather lemons in the orangery, the nights he walked the gardens alone in thought, the tears he did not shed when his children died, and you remember how he bore grief like armour, never removing it, never letting it dent. Back in Versailles, the Regency has begun in earnest. Young Louis XV plays in the gardens, oblivious to the machinery stirring around him. Ministers debate reforms. The nobility, once tamed by etiquette and ritual, begins to stir again. The court does not forget Louis XIV, but it begins, slowly, to look beyond him, and you find yourself asking, what did he leave behind? He left a France unified, admired, feared, a country with new borders, new institutions, new pride. He left Versailles, a palace so vast and symbolic that it reshaped the identity of monarchy itself. He left a dynasty, the Bourbons, stronger than ever. But he also left questions. Can such centralization survive without the charisma that built it? Can splendor endure when the world begins to seek simplicity? Can legacy live when the candle has burned so long it dims the air around it? In the late evening, you walk the gallery of the Grand Trianon, a more intimate retreat Louis built years ago to escape the very splendor he created. The breeze is cool, the windows are open, the gardens are hushed. You sit on a stone bench and gaze up at the sky, where once Louis saw himself reflected in Apollo, god of light. But now the sky is not blazing, it is soft, blue-grey, quiet. And in this gentle twilight, you realize something. The legacy of Louis XIV is not just in battles and buildings. It is in questions asked, in silences felt, in the tension between order and humanity. A man who sought to control everything except, perhaps, the passage of time. The wind stirs the hedges. The palace behind you glows faintly with lantern light. And though the king is gone, his story remains etched not only in marble, but in memory. You awaken once more in Versailles, but it no longer feels the same. The halls are still as vast, the mirrors still shimmer when the light hits them, the gardens still bloom with astonishing symmetry, but everything now exists with a kind of softness, as if the great machine that once ticked with precise grandeur has slowed, not broken, but breathed out its final command. The Sun King is gone, and you are here to witness what remains. It has been months since his passing, and life has reshaped itself in small but visible ways. The new king, Louis XV, is only a boy, and the regency is in full swing. Philippe d'Orléans governs with a different, energyless, rigid, less ceremonial. The court breathes a little easier. Nobles speak with less caution. The endless rituals of rising and dressing, once sacrosanct, are softened, and yet his presence lingers. You walk the same paths the old king once strolled each morning. You visit the royal chapel where he once prayed, the war room where he charted his campaigns, the private salon where he whispered final advice to his young heir. It is all still here, and so are the people. You find Madame de Maintenon living quietly in retirement at Saint-Cyr, where she oversees her beloved school for girls. She no longer wears the fine silks of Versailles. Her clothing is simple, her words measured, but her eyes hold the weight of decades. He was not easy to love, she tells you one afternoon, but he was impossible to forget. The girls adore her, as Louis once did, and here, in this quiet refuge, the echoes of the palace feel more human, less polished, more real. Outside of Versailles, France is already beginning to change. New ideas flicker in Parisian cafe talk of reason, liberty, balance between monarch and subject. The old belief that the king's word is divine begins to thin, like fog before the morning sun. The age of enlightenment is still a whisper, but it has begun, and yet even the brightest minds of the next century will look back at Louis XIV with fascination. Voltaire will call his reign the most brilliant in history. Others will call it wasteful, autocratic, an illusion of control built on suffering. You walk through a library in Paris and see his image already etched into books and busts, plays and pamphlets. Some praise, some mock, some simply try to understand. And isn't that always the fate of legacy, to be remembered not as it was, but as it is interpreted back in Versailles? The palace remains. It will survive wars, revolutions, empire and restoration. It will become a symbol not only of Louis's glory, but of France itself. And people will come, century after century, to walk its mirrored halls, to breathe its perfumed air, to stand where he once stood, and wonder. You spend one final night in the gardens. The stars are clear above the Grand Canal. The statues stand still in their silent poses. A breeze rustles the trees Louis once ordered, planted in perfect rows, and you remember it all. The 5-year-old boy who became king, the young man who danced as the sun, the sovereign who ruled longer than any before him, the old monarch who looked death in the eye and gave counsel with his final breath. Louis XIV lived not only to reign, but to define what a reign could be. You close your eyes, and in that darkness, you see his entire life flicker across your mind like candlelight wars and weddings, fountains and sermons, applause and silence, the boy, the king, the sun, and then only stillness. Now, my dear listener, your journey through the reign of Louis XIV is complete. You've walked the gardens of Versailles, stood beneath mirrored ceilings, heard the hushed prayers of a fading king, and watched the shadows lengthen over a golden age. Let your breath soften now. Let the weight of history dissolve. There is no need to remember every date or every name, only the feeling of time, gently flowing, the sense of a life that shaped a nation, and the quiet truth that all things, even suns, must set. You are safe now. You are still. You are drifting. Let the candle burn low. Let the echoes grow faint. And as you slip softly into sleep, know that the story of the world continues, calmly, steadily, always forward. Good night.